Hello and welcome to the live. I'm sitting here in conversation with Mick Sowry, who is the director of Musica Surfica, a film he made with the Australian Chamber Orchestra, and the creative director of Great Ocean Quarterly, which is a journal about art, ideas and the sea. Welcome, Mick, and great to have you here, and I'd love to hear a little bit more information about how Great Ocean Quarterly came to be.
Well, Great Ocean Quarterly happened when I've been enamoured with the whole idea of the word Great Ocean from surfing this coast for years and years, and the Great Ocean Road, and I kept thinking that perhaps I could do something with it, and I registered the name because I had the bright idea of trying to have a clothing label back in the late 90s, and that didn't happen, but I kept daydreaming Great Ocean, and in the late 2008, maybe 2009, 2010, I started doodling things, the idea of a magazine, and Great Ocean Quarterly popped into my head, and I was a big fan of things like Lapham's Archive, which is a magazine, and the New Yorker, the whole idea of a publication that came out every quarter, which gave time to actually make it spectacular and good. And but again, it was a daydream, and I started doing layouts. I started doing mocking that up as an art director in my other life in an ad agency. I was able to do all of these graphic design types of things, and I had pages and pages and pages, and I think I probably did 15, 20 covers, just going, what's this going to look like? Again, daydreams. And I showed it to a friend of mine, Mark Willett, this particular day, and Mark's as go-getters though he's the go-getterest go-getter that you've ever met, you know, and he's sort of like an ever-ready battery man. And Mark said, let's do it. And I went, yeah, well, if anyone's going to sort of G me up to get it over the line, it'll be Mark. Yeah. And he sort of started, in a sense, you know, it was Mark's force of personality that really was the thing that forced it over the line. Yeah. His enthusiasm G'd me up and gave me confidence. And we knew that, like, I to try and for one person to be the editor and the creative director and build the thing and all of this, it was just an enormous task. And we talked between ourselves and decided we needed to get an editor, someone else that had a sort of really strong literary base. And Jock Sarong was the man, and Jock was still in the law at that time, and he was thinking he wanted to become an author, and he was in the middle of his first novel. Okay. And he said, he put his hand up and said, yeah, I'll do it. And so he came on board as the editor. He brought a really unique voice to it, and we just set on the train of building it for the first one. And that was probably, that whole issue probably took the best part of 2013 to get to the first one. But then we got it out, and we were incredibly proud of it. And people, if they go to the Great Ocean Quarterly Instagram, at Great Ocean Quarterly, you'll see what we're doing at the moment is showing the covers as we're going chronologically through the years. Okay. So I think we're up to number 3 or 4 at the moment. And the first cover was a young Sudanese lad called Bior Maylol, who John Frank had seen coming out of the water swimming up at the sea bars in Geelong, and taken this shot that ended up becoming runner-up in the Bowness Prize. It's an amazing shot. And we'd come across it, and John's an old friend of mine, and we sort of thought about, well, what face do we want to put to the world for our first cover? And this idea of the sea is something that was inclusive and for everybody, and to have this kid that was new to Australia. He was a budding AFL footballer, and I thought, well, we all thought when I put it up as a cover, yes, it's like it's absolute given, and we're really proud of that. But the whole point, I suppose, was that I'll go back to the idea of why the magazine was I wanted a magazine in my conceptual stages that was for anybody that had a love of the ocean. Now, we're all surfers, all three of us are surfers, but I didn't want a surfing magazine. I wanted something that I'm interested in art, I'm interested in photography, I'm interested in literature, I'm interested in poetry, I'm interested in painting. Yeah. I figured, well, and I'm interested in science, and that's probably been my bugbear for my life, is that I'm interested in everything, and that's probably why was in the ad industry, because that was a great industry if somebody's into everything. Yeah. So it was, a lot of it was my personality and my interests being sort of forced into this, but I figured there's got to be lots and lots of people out there like me that are just curious, world curious people. And that was, fortunately, with Mark and Jock, we had two, three fellow travellers. Yeah. So we did it, and so over the coming 3 years, we started to push these magazines out and try to build a subscriber base at a time when print was dying. I've got a very good friend, Andrew Jaspin, who was the editor of The Age at the time, and we, why am I the friends with Andy? Because our kids play basketball together. But he was saying, Mick, you've got to think about it, because print's being a pretty challenged space. But at the same time, he said, I love the smell of ink. Yeah. It's an incredible thing when you pick it up. Yeah. And indeed, probably the most emotional moment of my life, apart from the birth of my kids, was when I first held the first copy of Great Ocean Quarterly.
Yeah. Well, it is a different experience, and that was one thing I wanted to ask you, that in this time of COVID, where everyone's stuck at home and many people are really heavily using screens and for all the good things, the way that it connects us together, but also it is also very nice to have time off screen. So I wanted to ask you a little bit about that. What is this idea going to do for people when it's actually paper in your hand? People don't sit down with a book so often now. They don't sit down with a magazine, but it is a really lovely experience.
Yeah, well, I suppose being an avid reader, and we all suffer from the flicking, the Instagram, and that lack of concentration, and almost like our concentration bone in our brain, if there's such a thing. Has disappeared. Yeah. And the nature of GOQ is that we do have short form articles, and we've got long form, and I know that everybody that, we've got one beside the toilet, a stack of them, and they're really good reading anytime. It's the kind of thing that you can dip into year in, year out, and with the people that have the full set, they've got a stack of 7, and you're continually you find new things. Yeah. Or if you don't go to it for 6 months and you go, I don't remember that article. Yeah. And we're assiduous in getting absolutely the top end of writers, and the funniest thing was that when we put out the first issue, and we're struggling to get enough subscribers to survive, to buy it, and it was out in newsagents all across the country, but it's such a challenging thing to look at, that first one with Bior. Yeah. But writers and photographers and artists from around the world were finding us and sending work in to be published. Okay. And so, and that was a great thrill, because there were so many thrills about doing the magazine. The fact that we were building it in a room in this house in Janjak, that we were getting some of the best people in the world wanting to be in this magazine. Yeah. And the whole point was, and we made a lot of mistakes, because but the mistakes weren't in the quality of the magazine. We were learning how to tell the world we existed. We were trying to make all of those sensitive, intelligent people that we know are out there. We wanted them to know that there was a magazine about the ocean, but all the parts of the ocean, everything that you love about it.
Well, from the articles that I've read, what stood out to me is that they all just seem to help you to see the ocean in ways that you hadn't expected before, or places in the world that you didn't know existed and are very interesting. And the quality of the photographs also are just beautiful fine art photography.
Well, and again, the question that Jock and I would ask ourselves all the time is it good enough to be in the magazine? And the first issue, because there were, budgetary restraints, and I'd be doing illustrations myself, and I'd be doing calligraphy myself, and I was making a rod for my own back all the time because I was going, I've got to make a work of art out of this. And then I realised as I went through future issues that I started to pare it back and allow it not to be about how clever I might be with all of those things. And I wasn't trying to be clever, I was just trying to do everything because I felt like it needed to have this really impactful thing. But I realised that actually it's the content, all the other people that we're bringing in that are going to do it, and that it was a learning experience. It got better and better and better. This particular issue that I'm building now, and I'm up every night till midnight building it, and the stuff that's coming in is just blowing my mind.
Can you talk about any of those, of the things that you're putting into this 8th edition that people are now buying?
We've got now a guy I found who was he's a young Russian biologist stroke photographer called Alexander Semenov, and he shoots marine invertebrates underneath the Arctic ice. And the photographs, see that you could even Google Alexander Semenov in Flickr, and they're just incredible, mind-blowing things. We've got an article on William Truebridge, who's a world record holding freediver.
Oh wow!
Yeah.
Okay. Wow, that would be amazing.
Yeah, but the good thing about that is we've got access to his baby photos.
Wow.
Yeah. So we've got this sort of combination of a life story because when he grew up as a little boy, his family were sailing the Pacific, and so we've got Will and his brother and his mum and dad on a boat, and the boys are naked and jumping off the boat and sitting on the edge with their mum, and we've got to be careful about how we crop those, of course, but and an astonishing guy, like he's now diving down to 350 odd feet. Incredible speaker, charismatic, and the shots are again amazing. But probably more beyond the shots, it's the story of him. I shot an article called "The Last Great Day." That last great day at the Springs, which is Tony Wright, who's a senior journalist at The Age and a fantastic writer in his own right, as a short story guy, and I'm sure plenty of other things. The stories he told me while I went to do a shoot at Bridgewater Bay in near Portland, and it was one of the most fascinating afternoons I've had, and I drove 5 hours there, or 4.5 hours there, shot for 4 hours, and then drove back, and nearly killed myself driving back. But the shots that I got out of that, and the stories that he told me about being in the war in Rwanda and battle zones, and I'm going, and this is a guy that's got a bit of emphysema now, and he's struggling to keep up with me walking in, but the adventures that he'd had are beyond belief. What else have we got? There's a young British poet called Dan Crockett. He's got a poem on Arctic foxes called Milraki. We've got two great poets in the magazine. And this is the thing, it's just all sorts of stuff.
There's people asking questions about what sort of articles are included, but we've also got Ben Sowry answering questions with philosophy, fiction, science.
Good on you, Ben. It's my brother. So trust him to come in on this. Yeah. So so yeah, like it's just been an adventure. And I'll go back to what happened to the magazine was that we were getting more and more and more enthused as we went by. We had Mark had got spreadsheets and charts and graphs and things, and we'd aimed to be self-sufficient.
Yeah.
I think on about issue 3 or 4,
Okay.
and we were putting money. We were just basically we were doing it for the love, with the view to making it solvent, but not expecting millions. We wanted it to be enough that we could keep doing it.
Yeah.
And because of the reception that we were getting with those that found us, we started to plan 2 more publications. We had one go on the books called Ink and Salt.
Mm-hmm.
It was going to be more like a newspaper.
Okay.
That we're going to put out. But this one particular day, and it was at issue. It was when we were planning this issue. So 2.3.
Yeah.
And we go, we've got Ink and Salt, and we've got this, and we've got that. And Mark said, well, let's have a look at the spreadsheet. And we went, we're stuffed.
Yeah.
We knew that if we kept going, we were going to bury ourselves.
Yeah.
I was living off. I can go back into that whole other story of my life and my financial. It's my adventures in trying to do art, and that's why I did the Reef, and that's why I did Musica Surfica, which was me selling, or us, Sue and I, selling our house in St Kilda, because I'd been in advertising for 28 years, and I felt like at the time I was 52, and I thought unless I do something now, I'm going to just be an advertising guy.
Yeah. And
I had to see if I could do something that sort of brought a little bit of light into the world. That was I've got this thing about beauty and trying to make everyone realise that we live in an incredible world, and it's probably my form of environmentalism.
Yeah.
By showing it.
Yeah.
Instead of I'm not that sort of overt that I'll go marching up and down the street.
Yeah. Yeah.
But it's demonstrative, my love for it.
Yeah. No, I've known people like that before who are not really into being an environmentalist and talking about that, but what they do is they teach people to love the earth.
Yes.
Because once you teach people to love the earth, then they'll look after it.
Yeah. And so I left advertising and started to do the film. I had the great opportunity to do Musica Surfica with the chamber orchestra, which came off the back of a pretty mad letter I sent to Richard Tognetti.
Yeah, and can you talk a little bit about, because what I was really interested in about Musica Surfica is it has a very different and interesting take on creativity. Yeah. And it was like an experiment in creativity, and what you discovered was very interesting. Yeah,
so Musica Surfica was, how do I say it? The original idea was for me to remake an old surfing film called Evolution. Not remake it, revisit it 40 years later. And I had permission and the blessing of Nat Young and Wayne Lynch, who were famous Australian surfers of the 60s, 70s, 80s. And they'd become friends of mine to make the film. And I sold our house, put the money in the bank, started doing filming.
Yeah.
I wanted a really different soundtrack. So I sent this letter off to Richard Tognetti, saying, would you be interested in being the sound designer? Yeah. And Richard came back to me within about 2 hours after I sent an email. I nearly fell over, and he goes, I'm in if you can find the money. Yeah. And so I went, well, bugger it, I'm in. But then it kept going. I went beauty, and then about a month later he rang me up and said, I'm playing at Hamer Hall. I want to have a meeting with you afterwards because I've got an idea. I want to throw something at you. And that thing was, he said he's going to go down and do this experimental thing called Musica Surfica. Okay. So they called it Musica Surfica. Right. Derek Hind came up with the term. Yeah. But what they wanted me to do was film them surfing, finless. Yes. And then they'd play it behind the band at the orchestra in concert. in this regional concert tour that they were doing, to get young bums on seats in a classical concert and get them to discover classical music. So I thought about it and thought, okay, and so what's the premise behind it? Why are you actually doing finless? And he said, well, without risk you can't learn anything. So this premise of risk, and I extrapolated that into the risk and creativity, and so I wrote a treatment, 2 pages, about what it might become if we did it as well as a documentary. And that got handed by Richard to the boss at the ACO, who's Matt, the general manager, and he handed it to Kim Williams it was actually given to Angus James, who was on the board, who was the head of the ABN AMRO Bank. Angus passed that on to Kim Williams at Foxtel, and it went down through Foxtel to the Bio channel, and they gave me some money. And so we made Musica Surfica. So we went down there, filmed a bunch of guys that had never ridden a finless surfboard before, falling off their boards for 2 weeks. But we had one brilliant, like genius level surfer in Derek Hind, and Derek was great at it. And so that juxtaposition of all of these other guys who were great surfers, like Tom Carroll, but they hadn't done finless. But we saw this improvement over that with those guys, because they were all talented. Sorry, bang. And Derek doing his thing. At the same time, every night we'd do a little concert, a classical musical concert. Classical music concert. We did one at the old cheese factory on the top end of King Island, and then we did 2 concerts, one for the townsfolk of King Island and one for the children of King Island. So a night concert and a day concert. And
how did what they discovered during the day with the surfing, what happened to the music at night? Was that one of the things?
It was more like we had these virtuoso musicians down there on King Island, and so we thought, well, we'll put on something for the island. But what happened was we recorded the concerts, and that repertoire that they played, I decided that's what the music would be for the film. So those recorded live things became the soundtrack to the movie, and the movie jumped back and forth from surfing to music with interviews. But that the way I constructed it told the story, and you just realised at the end that this thing about risk and creativity can transpose into anything. And doing Great Ocean Quarterly is risk and creativity. And doing a painting is risk and creativity, because unless you put yourself outside your comfort zone, it's going to be a rubbish painting. And so, more questions?
Well, there is a question about whether you can please tell the Attenborough story.
Oh, right. Well, apparently, I've got to remember the Attenborough story in its fullness, but I think one of our fans had the magazine, and they were at, I think it was Sydney Airport, and they handed it to David Attenborough as he was walking through, and he collared it and marched off with it under his arm, and it was a big oh, this is good. So that's my memory of it. So So we actually sort of tried to hit him up to come on or something like that, if memory serves. So where was I? I was talking about so Musica Surfica. So we did that. It ended up winning the New York Surf Film Festival, and then it won over the period of about 18 months every ocean festival in the world. It did fantastically well in that sense. And then, we sold it to the ABC. I thought, beauty, it might pay the mortgage for a couple of years or something, but you discover that arts films don't make you lots of money. But it wasn't about that. What it did do was start a fantastic relationship with the chamber orchestra. Richard and the orchestra became good friends, and to the point that every time they were down here I'd have to take them surfing. And that was a whole experience and a joy over a period of years. And then shortly after that, or probably 2 years later, should I say, I was looking at the Sydney Opera House website, and there was this thing that the Chamber Orchestra was doing called the Reef. And I went, what's that? And then I'm going, oh, this is good, interesting, great music. They're going up to Nalu in the northwest of Western Australia to shoot. And at the bottom it had director me, Mick Sowry, and I'm going, what? What? I pick up the phone to Richard and what's going on here? And he says, hasn't anyone told you we want you to direct this? Right. So I had to come up with an idea. Being and part of being an advertising person is the whole reason that you're in that job is that you're good at ideas, or reasonably good. And so the idea that I came up with was about because I'll go back a step. I knew we were just going up there to shoot lots of surfing. Yeah. And that's not enough to stick behind an orchestra. So what I thought of doing was make sure that I constructed the way that was to cover dawn to dusk and the idea I had behind it was sort of provoked by the recent death of my dad and me being quite sort of a bit reflective on mortality. Yeah. So I made it your life from birth to death. So the structure of the film was started underwater and ended looking up at the Milky Way and then all the stars in the Milky Way start to blink out. Right. And then until there's one. Okay. And that blinks out and that's you. Yeah. So, but I didn't have a narrative, you just had to get it. Yeah. So it was structured like it was a painting. Yeah. It was just this big painting that played for an hour and 20 minutes. Okay. And so, that toured all around Australia and it played in Europe and China, oddly enough. And and then after that was when we did Great Ocean Quarterly. Yeah. So that was in 2012 that we did The Reef, and late 2013 was around the time, or early 2013 was when I showed Mark the magazine. Yeah. And we had it out by the end of the year. Okay. So that was.
So was The Reef also the idea to take music to the masses again? Absolutely. Same thing.
Well, yeah, but in a much more. No, it was actually more a performance for film and orchestra. By this stage, we'd had it on. We thought we might have had it on lock to do something pretty spectacular. And when we played the Sydney Opera House, the screen was as wide as the Sydney Opera House stage. It was huge, and it was an enormous concert. In fact, we had standing ovations every single concert we ever played, and there was even comments from one guy in particular, Peter Clevenger, who headed up the Clevenger Advertising, which is one of the biggest agencies in Australia, and he emailed through, that's the greatest concert he's ever been to in his life. But it was the greatest theatrical performance. Yeah. Now, I mean, maybe he was had a couple of shardies, I don't know. But it was pretty gratifying.
I don't think he'd write it if it wasn't true.
And so we did that, and then as I said, we embarked on Great Ocean Quarterly for the best part of 3 years, and went through that experience, and then
So with the gathering of funds for the Great Ocean Quarterly, can you talk a little bit about the support for the arts? Like, creative arts in Australia is 6% of the economy, but it generally isn't given much money by government. And you told me a little bit about the parallels with the New Yorker, which has been held up by philanthropists for the first 90 years and didn't start making a profit until then.
You're giving away my story.
Go ahead.
So. As I said in the beginning, I was inspired by the New Yorker as a publication because I loved the eclectic nature of it. It was full of stuff, and the structure of it. But then interestingly, I'd been listening to a thing on the ABC sometime later and heard them talking about the fact that they'd only ever achieved sort of financial autonomy 90 years down the track,
Yeah.
and they've been held up by philanthropy.
Yeah.
And you'll find that a lot of the better magazines that aren't populist are held up that way, particularly in the States and Europe. And in Australia, you know, I'm not sure what ones are parallel to Great Ocean Quarterly, to be honest, because it's not a surfing magazine that's got a huge instant market.
Yeah.
Even though we were surfers, and some people kept thinking, oh, well, you know, it's a surfing magazine. It's not. It was, and there's not a lot of support for it. Like right now, I've done a bit of sort of research on, well, actually a friend of magazines has done some research on getting funding, and there is not a niche for something like this.
Yeah.
Unless you're in a sort of a, you know, what you call a minority group or something like that. But we're, you know, in the end, you know, cut to the chase, it's three Anglo guys punching out a magazine, and, you know, professional guys of sorts. You know.
Yeah, and it's a magazine that's full of very interesting philosophy and poetry and amazing writing and really beautiful photographs, and so I think it would appeal to a lot of people just to have the magazine, but also to be a supporter of it.
Yeah, well, look, it's right now we're doing this as the Lost Eighth edition because we never did it, and look, going back at the beginning of last year, well, middle of 2018, my wife Sue fell ill with pancreatic cancer. So I had this particularly, or we had a pretty shocking 5.5 months. Had its absolutely amazing bright points in it, but in the end, you know, it was a given that Sue wasn't going to survive it. It was the prognosis when we found out was it's terminal. There's nothing we can do. That was the words we were told. And so I had that journey. My world, our family went on hold, and basically after Sue's death I went on hold for months. And but at Sue's funeral, Mark in particular said, Nikki, why don't we think about doing that last edition? And we thought about it, but last year wasn't the year to do it. I wasn't mentally up for it. And then early this year we started to go, no, bugger it, we're going to give this a crack. And it was just starting to, you know, tip over when the COVID thing happened. And the idea was in our heads, and then we said, now's the time. Because suddenly it was a thing that we were actually going to give, you know, the whole focus of everybody every day is this damn virus. And suddenly, you know, my focus is not on the virus anymore. Although every day I want to know what the numbers are. But I'm going, okay, but this is going to go on for a couple of years. What can we do? Bring something that's positive. Bring some joy. And we you know, I won't say we're uniquely equipped to do it, but we are equipped to actually give it a good crack. And so Mark sat down and did the numbers, and to get 1,200 copies out, which is the number that the 48,000 that we're trying to raise, will pay the printer, contributors and distribution, and that's it. And there's a little bit in there for expenses for me and Jock and Mark, but travel stuff, we're not getting paid. And when it comes to the crunch in about, you know, 3 or 4 weeks, when hopefully we've got our money, I'll be working, you know, 15 hours a day to finish it. And as will Jock, as will Mark, as will Tim and Ali. And Ali is doing our publicity. She's making a lot of this happen. Tim Semple is the back end in digital, and he's making that happen. Jock's editing, I'm building it and doing print production and photo editing and all of that.
And so you're halfway into the pledges now?
We had a very generous donation today. So we're at over 30,000 now, and we were only halfway 2 days ago. So it's going up. We just need to keep pushing it, and over the next 3 weeks there'll be more and more content going out. I'm cutting a little movie thing to go onto Instagram at the moment, just constantly pushing so that people get to realise what they're going to get.
Yeah, and if you do want to pledge, there is a link in the title of this live, so that's the place to press if you'd like to buy a copy.
Yeah. So so that's kind of it. So we've got a possible campaign going, and that's being the hub of it, I suppose. Yeah.
Can you talk a little bit about your thoughts on creativity and what creativity does for healing? You know, obviously you're someone who's experienced a fair bit of trauma, how creativity has helped you through that, and what people who, I mean, also during this time of COVID, there's a lot of trauma and a lot of people struggling.
I doodle all the time.
That's all right.
That's creativity.
So what is creativity to you as a great healer?
Well, creativity. Look, I think creativity is something that, you know, people say, "Oh, you're very creative," and I go, "No, I'm not. I'm just it's being part of what I am." But everybody's got it within them. Mm-hmm. Creativity is being able to think a little bit left of centre, but everybody. I really believe anybody that's got a sense of humour is a creative person, because you have to have that ability to shift the focus and go and bring in the unlikely, that phase shifter that makes someone laugh. You know. So from a point of view though of healing, whenever you're involved in a creative process, you're outside yourself. You're not thinking about the things that are making you miserable. And so for me, you know, and it's not just like sport, going surfing. Surfing's a creative process, because in the process of riding a wave, you're in a flow, hopefully in a flow state. Yeah. You're just reacting. Yeah. Art is reactive. Music is reactive once you've mastered it. You know, if you watch any good musician and they're getting into a groove, they're just flowing. There's great sort of solace in that. So creativity in any form, even if you're at home and you've got an easel up and you're doing your first attempt at a painting, there'll be moments in there where you go, "My God, I didn't think I could do that." So there's always joy to be found. If you're doing ikebana or bloody macrame, macrame, whatever, taking you out of whatever's bothering you. Yeah. So look, it's just that's why. Like, I had an exchange with somebody on Facebook when they were talking about the funding in the beginnings of COVID, and you know, the money that had to go to industry and that had to go to medicine and science, and there was a little bit of a stink going on, which is completely appropriate to this, was that the arts industries weren't getting funded. Yeah. And it's in Australia right now, they're not getting funded. There's a thing going on now. We're trying to get the arts funded. So, for instance, in classical music, or you know, the sort of high-end arts, the high arts in Europe, they're getting 90% funding of their organisations to keep them through this, because you've got a lot of incredibly talented people that are on the crux of losing their jobs. It's sort of like JobKeeper for the arts. Yeah. In Australia, that's not happening at the moment. You've got organisations like the Australian Chamber Orchestra that are suddenly on their knees when they've got actually concerts all around the world booked, but they can't go there. Yeah. And yet, if you go to their website, they're working like Trojans, pumping out arts material. And the person that came at me on Facebook said, what do we need the arts for? And I said, well, what? Just as simple as this. What does the doctor who's at the hospital come home to? Yeah. Do they come home to a grey box and sit in silence? Yeah. No, they put on a film or play some music or look at a painting or all of those things that the arts brings. It's the soul of
it's who we lives.
Are. It's absolutely that. So it's the most human thing you can do is express yourself. You know, even if you're walking down the road whistling, suddenly you're being an artist for 5 minutes. It might be crappy whistling, but you're being an artist.
Yeah.
So that's why creativity is probably, you know, almost the prime mover in our lives. Then you go into the sciences and you'll go, you know, this one of my favourite quotes is Albert Einstein. You know, theory of relativity and all of that. That came about when he daydreamed, what would the world look like if I was riding on a beam of light? And it was just a thought experiment. Then he puts himself onto the beam of light and imagine yourself sitting on a beam of light, screaming across space and going, okay, what's everything else look like?
Yeah.
And because of that profound imagination that he had, he was able to sort of extrapolate the whole thing about time dilation. Yeah. And that time slows down the faster you're going. Yeah. All of those sorts of things. And if you actually inquisite the way he thinks and what he was thinking, it makes perfect sense. Yeah. Yeah. But that's an artistic thought. It's not a scientific thought. It's an artistic thing. That's you know, he had.
I think one of his famous quotes. Well, one of his famous quotes was that imagination is more important than knowledge. Yes,
I've got that on my coffee cup.
Yeah.
So it's the truth. So yeah. So to your point, creativity is like profoundly, like great. Even the guys now that are trying to get a virus. A vaccine, I guarantee you there'll be the creative moments of those aha things where they go, what about if we looked at that? And it's not a scientific thing where he's sitting down writing an equation. Yeah. Whatever that immunologist or scientist doing is going, with the vast amount of knowledge that I've got, what's the left field things that might come out of this that they're going to solve this problem? Yeah, yeah. Yeah. So creativity, you can't beat it.
The interdisciplinary way of connecting things together that you don't expect.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah. Very interesting. I think we've covered a lot.
How long have we gone?
We are 42 minutes.
Okay.
So I'm wondering if, and also should mention, if anyone has any questions, can you please put them in the comments? Sometimes there's a little bit of a delay, so if you can put any questions as you think of them, that would be great.
Yeah. So articles in the magazine, have I covered that?
Yeah, we've gone into that quite a few of those. I'm wondering whether you want to refer to any of these other things that you've done, like this book that you produced on fire, or...
well, I'll flog it because it needs flogging. Now that is a book that was put out by Peter McConkie, and I designed it about, and I'm doing this for a specific reason because it's a very appropriate, and if you go to Cyclops Press on Instagram, they're selling that at the moment, and because it's about fire and it's basically Aboriginal land management by fire, and it's become incredibly appropriate given the recent fires when we thought we had a disaster, and now we've got one after the other. Yeah. And I noticed that there's been a surge in interest in the book, and I was very chuffed the fact that it was one I designed. Yeah. So yeah, that. And because that was probably the second book I designed, that informed a lot about my approach to the magazine. Okay. Yeah, I learned a lot doing that, and that helped me in going into Great Ocean Quarterly. Yeah.
And also, speaking of fire, it also reminds me that I wanted to ask you a little bit more about your ideas on creativity and what you referred to before about sustainability and climate change.
Oh yeah, okay. Creativity.
Just on that point of the importance of creativity and how it's valued, and what it's going to add in the future.
Yeah. Okay. Well, look, we in probably the best example of a thing like that, and was that there's currently beach plastic. We bump into it all the time, and I think he's a young Belgian lad, about 5 years ago had the bright idea of a way of getting it out of the oceans, and it was such a creative solution with this system of booms and catchment that's now working, I think, around the world, or at least in the high level of development, to be able to scoop up the plastic.
Yeah.
I mean, in the end, again, that just goes back to left field thinking and how are we going to solve it. You know, I'm not climate change. That's requires engagement by governments and obviously we've got multiplicity of populist governments around the world that are just pushing against it at the moment. Mr. Trump and Mr. Morrison and name one, name many, are still not behind that barrow as much as we'd like. So the creativity side, funnily enough, when I was over at Portland, I was greatly sort of gratified by the amount of wind farm that was over there, and likewise in the similar sort of situation in eastern Victoria and Gippsland, there's a lot of that. But look, this is, I have a vague, a sort of a gentle feeling that the mood is shifting, and obviously it is from the point of view of electric cars and the shift to renewables, despite the pushings and shovings of the gas and oil industries. But where it's going to go, I'm not sure. You know, we're on a wing and a prayer.
Yeah.
And we've got COVID.
Yeah. Yeah.
So, yeah. I think we're kind of there.
Yeah.
Talk about the possible campaign.
Well, just perhaps a little bit about the journal and where you see its use. You know, is it mainly going to be for people in private homes, or have you found that people for doctors' surgeries like to have it?
Both. We've actually had a couple of major donors into the possible campaign that have been people buying multiple copies for their clients. We've got a few of those companies.
Yeah.
So, look, the journal's for anybody who's interested in things oceanic.
Yeah.
But it's smart enough to be left anywhere.
Yeah.
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 Now, who's anyone giving me something else there? No, there's a love it there. I like that. Yeah, it's like I couldn't. I'd love it if we were able to get to do this one, and then I'd love it more if we had enough that we could keep doing it.
Yeah.
And one of my greatest wishes for this was that it got to the point that it was big enough that we were actually employing people.
Yeah.
Because then it's not just Mick and Mark and Jock, it's picking a number of names. I really enjoy working with young designers because they're so much better than I am, because they're just full of just vigour and it's all new.
Yeah.
And you know, I'm lucky to be well enough, you know, like I'm pushing along fine, but I can give more by helping somebody get better than trying to get better myself.
Yeah.
And that creative energy that they bring. So if we were Great Ocean Quarterly in Torquay on the surf coast, pushing out a magazine to the whole world, how good does that look for the surf coast?
Yeah.
How good does that look for Victoria?
Yeah.
And it's nothing about getting rich. It's just about enriching.
Yeah.
You know, it's just making something like when I moved down here with Sue and Tom 8 years ago. I've been surfing this coast since 1970. I came down here and we started looking for. I started just experiencing it beyond being someone who comes here to surf, and I realised how deep the talent pool is down here. It's just ridiculous. People hidden away doing stuff.
Yeah.
And Geelong, same. And you go, okay, why do kids have to chase up to Melbourne to get the jobs or the plum stuff? Because there's no reason why we can't do things that are absolutely world class coming from this town and this coast. and or this extended southwestern Victoria and or regional Australia. And the more things that happen that are coming from, you know, a decentralised thing, the better it's going to be for the whole country, really.
Yeah.
So this is like our little small steps, 3 guys having a crack. If it's only one copy and, you know, one issue and we get it out there, we'll be so proud. And I was talking to Mark today, and Mark's a really high achieving guy, and he said, when I die, this magazine will be the thing that stands out. Same for me, same for Jock.
Yeah.
Because we know the effort we put into it, we know how beautiful they were, and we probably at the back of our minds is what might have been.
Yeah.
But if it got to be not Great Ocean Quarterly but Great Ocean occasionally, I'll run with it. If it got to be, you know, if we did an annual thing, but it was enough that we could actually fund it to do it, that'd be enough.
Yeah.
If there was a philanthropist out there that said, no, bugger this, here's, you know, enough money to do it for 3 years, and just give it its chance instead of us petering out because we were putting it out of our pockets all the time. Then you'd go, well, there's a damn fine chance it could become a worldwide magazine. We're already worldwide in our contributorship. We just need the world. We've got subscribers in America. We had a bookshop from New York come in the other day wanting copies. We've got bookshops in the UK the same. We had distribution in the UK and the US in a minor way. We had subscribers in God knows how many countries, but it was one here, one there, one there. But if we were able to break into a US and European market, we'd be swimming. We'd have probably, you know, a team of 15 down here, and the magazine would be that much better again.
Yeah. Well, I've ordered my copy, and I'm very excited about getting it. So I hope it all goes ahead.
Well, fingers crossed. So look, I'm going to wrap it up. So look, the big thing is to tick on the possible thing, the opportunity to go to the possible page, and you don't even have to spend any money, because what happens is if we get the 1,200 enough to get to the 48,000, then your $40, which is what the magazine will be, comes out of your credit card. Or if you've got pockets as deep as, you know, the ocean out there, then throw a bucket load in, and we'll give you a big shout out.
All right.
So,
thank you very much, Mick, and hope it all goes well. I'm definitely cheering it on. All right. And if anyone has any other questions, you can continue to put them in, and we'll endeavour to get them answered for you.
No worries. Thank you, everybody.